The grave had a small crack running along the bottom left corner of the headstone. Daniel had noticed it for the first time 2 years ago. He had told himself he would get it repaired. He hadn't. Every year he came back and the crack was still there, a little longer, a little deeper, and every year he stood in front of it and felt the same thing he always felt, that nothing he did for her was ever going to be enough. Her name was carved cleanly into the stone. Miriam Osei, beloved wife, gone too soon. The flowers he brought every year were white lilies, the ones she had carried at their wedding. He placed them at the base of the headstone the way he always did, carefully, both hands, like he was handing something to a person who could still receive it. He had been doing this for 4 years. 4 years of white lilies. 4 years of standing here in his good shoes on this quiet hillside cemetery outside Accra, while the city moved behind him and the wind came off the hills and the trees made their soft sound. 4 years of talking to a stone because there was no other way left to talk to her. You would have been 34 this month, he said quietly. He always started with something like that, a fact, something grounded. Because if he started with how much he missed her, he would not be able to stop. I finished the Takoradi project. You would have hated the color I chose for the lobby. You would have been right to hate it. I'm going to change it. He stood there for another few minutes. The cemetery was quiet on a Thursday morning. An old groundskeeper was working somewhere behind the trees. A bird was doing something persistent in a nearby acacia. Daniel pressed his fingers briefly to the top of the headstone, the way he always did before leaving. Then he straightened up, picked up the empty paper he had wrapped the flowers in, and walked back down the hill to where his car was parked. He sat in the driver's seat for a while without starting the engine. His phone was on the passenger seat. He had 4 missed calls from his brother Victor, 2 from the office, and 1 from a number he didn't recognize. The number had a regional code he couldn't immediately place, somewhere in the Ashanti region. He called his office back first. His assistant Grace told him the contractor for the Kumasi project had pushed the delivery date by 2 weeks. He told her to find a replacement contractor and hung up. He called Victor back. Victor's phone rang 6 times and went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He looked at the unknown number for a moment, then called it. It picked up on the second ring. Daniel. The voice was familiar in a way that took him 1 second to place, then hit him fully. Kweku Mensa. They had been at university together, architecture and medicine respectively, 2 people from the same hometown of Kumasi who had ended up at the same Accra University and become close friends for 4 years before life did what life does and moved them to different cities, different worlds, different rhythms. They had spoken occasionally over the years. Christmas messages, birthday acknowledgments, the kind of contact that said we still remember each other without asking much of either person. Kweku, Daniel said. It's been a while. A pause. Yes, Daniel, I need to tell you something. Another pause, this one longer, the kind that tells you the next sentence is going to cost something, and I need you to hear it properly before you react. I need you to just listen to the whole thing first. The engine was still off. The cemetery was still quiet behind him. Okay, Daniel said. I'm listening. I've been doing volunteer rotations at a rural health clinic outside Kumasi. Maternal health, under 5s, basic medicine. It's a small place, a village called Aboabo Kuma, about 2 hours from the city. I've been going every 2 weeks for the past 8 months. He stopped. Daniel, last Tuesday I was there and a woman came in with a small boy, maybe 3, maybe 4 years old. The boy had a fever. She was calm about it, the way mothers get when they've handled illness alone enough times to know how to hold it. Daniel waited. Kweku's voice dropped slightly. I was filling out the registration form. I asked her name. She gave me a name I didn't recognize. But Daniel, when she turned to pick up the boy, I saw her face properly, and I stood there for 10 seconds just frozen. Because I know that face. I've known that face since your wedding. I sat across from her at your table for 3 hours on the night you got married. His voice was careful, controlled, but underneath it was something shaking. Daniel, the woman who came into that clinic with that little boy. She looked exactly like Miriam. The word dropped into the car and filled it completely. Daniel's hand tightened around the phone. Kweku, he said slowly. You're sure? I didn't say anything to her. I didn't want to scare her. I finished the consultation, treated the boy, and I watched her the entire time. Her face, the way she moves, the way she tilts her head when she's thinking. I've been sitting with this for 6 days, trying to convince myself I was wrong. His voice cracked slightly. I can't convince myself. Daniel, I think you need to come here. Daniel sat in the car outside the cemetery where he had just placed white lilies on his wife's grave and felt something happen to the inside of his chest that he had no name for. It was not hope. He was too careful for hope. It was the specific feeling of a man who has closed a door very firmly after a long time of grief and is now being told, 6 days too late to prepare for it, that something has knocked from the other side. He started the engine. "Don't tell anyone you called me," he said. "Not anyone. Just wait." He drove for 2 hours without stopping. He did not call his brother back. He did not call Grace. He drove through Accra's northern traffic, out onto the highway, and into the open country where the road straightened and the city fell behind and the land opened up into something older and quieter. He drove on instinct, on the coordinates Kweku had sent him, on the particular alertness of a man moving toward something he cannot afford to misunderstand. He found Kweku outside the clinic at 2:30 in the afternoon. Kweku was thinner than he remembered, his face carrying the specific tiredness of a doctor who works in places that are always short of everything. He shook Daniel's hand and held it for a moment longer than a handshake required. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I've been sick with this all week." "Tell me everything," Daniel said. "From the beginning," Kweku told him. The woman had given the name Adwo Adarko at registration. She lived in the village, had been there for almost 3 years according to the clinic's records. She had brought the boy twice before. The boy's name on the records was Noah, 4 years old. Daniel went still. 4 years old, Kweku said quietly. "I noticed that too." The math was not complicated. Miriam had died 4 years and 3 months ago. If the boy was 4, if Miriam had been pregnant when the car went off the road on the Accra to Kumasi highway in the early hours of a Saturday morning, a crash so severe that the car had gone down an embankment into thick bush and burned. The search teams had found the wreckage after 12 hours. They had found enough to close the case. They had not found a body. The police had explained this. Highway crashes in that terrain were unpredictable. The body could have been displaced in the impact, thrown clear, moved by the fire, carried by rainwater into the surrounding bush. It happened. It was a tragedy, and it happened. The case had been closed within a month. The death certificate had been issued. The funeral had been held. Victor had helped him through all of it. "Where does she live?" Daniel asked. Kweku pointed down the main path of the village. "Third house past the community tap. Blue door." Daniel looked down the path. The village was quiet in the mid-afternoon heat. Goats near a fence. Children somewhere making sounds. An old man asleep on a bench outside a shop. He walked alone. He passed the community tap. He counted the houses. He stopped in front of the third one. The door was blue, the paint old and faded to the color of a sky after rain. He stood in front of it for a moment and breathed. Then he knocked. Silence. Then footsteps, small and quick, and the door opened and a small boy looked up at him with enormous, dark, completely unafraid eyes. He was wearing a red shirt and no shoes, and his face stopped Daniel's heart. He knew that face. He had seen it every morning in his own mirror for 38 years. That jaw, that forehead, the particular spacing of the eyes. The boy looked at him with the direct, uncomplicated curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to be wary of strangers, and Daniel's entire body went very still. "Who are you?" the boy asked. A voice came from inside the house. "Noah, come away from the door." The boy didn't move. He kept looking at Daniel with those eyes. The voice came closer. "Noah, I said come." The door opened wider, and a woman appeared behind the boy and looked at Daniel, and her face did what Kweku had described. It went completely, instantly still. The stillness of a person who has just seen the thing they have been afraid of seeing for a very long time. Daniel looked at his wife. She was thinner. Her hair was different, natural, shorter, pulled back simply. She was wearing a plain dress, the kind that costs nothing, and she was barefoot on the concrete floor of her own doorway. She looked like herself. She looked exactly like herself. 4 years of a grave and white lilies and a cracked headstone, and she was standing in front of him in a village 2 hours from Accra looking at him like he was the most frightening thing she had ever seen. "Miriam," he said. Her hand found the top of the boy's head. She pressed it there gently, instinctively. Not gripping, just covering. "No," she said. Her voice was low. "Please, please just leave. You're alive. Daniel, please." He took one step forward. "You're alive and you never told me." She stepped back, pulling Noah with her. Not angry, not cold. Afraid. Genuinely, deeply afraid, and it was the fear in her eyes more than anything else that stopped him from stepping forward again. Because whatever he had expected, it was not this. "Please come inside," she said finally. Her voice had steadied slightly. Not because she was calm, because she had made a decision. "Come inside and close the door. But you cannot stay long. You have to understand that before we say anything else. You cannot stay here." He went inside. The house was small and clean and bare in the way that things are bare when someone has chosen simplicity deliberately rather than arrived at it by accident. A table, 3 chairs, a wooden shelf with a few books and a tin of pencils, a clay pot of water near the window. On the wall, one drawing in crayon, 2 figures holding hands, a woman and a small boy. No father. Daniel looked at it for one long moment. Noah had climbed onto one of the chairs and was watching Daniel with frank, comfortable curiosity. He had a piece of folded paper in his hand that he was turning into something, some kind of small shape, and he kept working on it even while watching. The confidence of a child who lives without fear in his own home. Daniel sat. Miriam remained standing, arms folded, back against the far wall. How? Daniel said. He meant to say more. He couldn't. She looked at him the way you look at a person when you are trying to work out how much they actually know before you decide how much to say. She had always done this. Even in their marriage, even in their best years, she had processed before she spoke. He had sometimes found it frustrating. He understood it now as what it was, caution born from intelligence. The car crash was real, she said. I want you to know that first. I didn't plan any of it. She unfolded her arms, then folded them again. I was driving that road. The car went off. I hit the embankment and I was thrown clear when the door gave way. I don't remember all of it. I remember cold and dark and pain, and then waking up in daylight with my face in wet grass and a sound like something still burning further down the slope. Daniel said nothing. A woman found me from this village. She had been walking the road at dawn. She helped me here. I had a broken collarbone and cracked ribs and a concussion that made thinking difficult for weeks. She looked at him steadily. And I was 11 weeks pregnant. The room was completely quiet. Noah looked up from his paper folding. He seemed to sense the quality of the silence and regarded both adults with brief assessment, then returned to his work. By the time I was well enough to think clearly, Miriam continued, I had been here for almost a month. And in that month, she paused, her voice remaining flat and careful the way voices get when they are describing something that still costs something to describe. I had time to think about the night before the crash. About the reason I was driving that road at that hour. About what I had found out 3 days before. What did you find out? Daniel said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Your brother Victor has been stealing from your father's company for 6 years. The words arrived slowly. Not from your company, she said. From your father's company. From Osei Construction, the one your father built and left to both of you. I found documents. I wasn't looking for them. I was going through your father's old files in the storage room because you asked me to help organize them for the transfer of the remaining assets to the new holding company. And I found transfers. Slow, small, repeated transfers routed through a supplier account that looked legitimate on the surface. The supplier did not exist. I checked. The account connected to a private holding under a name I didn't recognize, and when I traced it further, she stopped. Daniel, Victor had been pulling money from Osei Construction since 6 months after your father's stroke, while your father was still alive but no longer able to check the accounts properly, while your father trusted him completely. Daniel's jaw was tight. How much? She looked at him. Close to $400,000 over 6 years. But it wasn't only money. She pressed her lips together. He had your father sign documents during the last year of his life. Power of attorney documents that your father believed were standard operational paperwork. They weren't. 2 parcels of land that your father owned, the Kumasi plot and the coastal property near Takoradi, had been transferred under those documents to a company Victor controls. Daniel had been completely still. His hands were on the table. He had not moved them. I was going to show you everything, Miriam said. I had copied the documents. I had prepared everything. I had called you that afternoon and you said you were in a meeting and would call me back, and I said it was important and you said tonight, we'll talk tonight. She looked away. The crash happened that night, on the way to your office, because I decided not to wait until you came home. Daniel felt something cold and very slow beginning to move through him. Her voice stayed steady. When I was lying here with a broken collarbone and weeks to think, I kept coming back to one thing. The brakes. The mechanic who serviced the car 2 weeks before had told me the brakes were fine. I had the car serviced because of a small noise. He checked everything and said it was fine. But when I went off that road, I had no brakes. I pressed them and there was nothing. No resistance, nothing. And I kept thinking about that over and over, lying here. No brakes. Documents implicating Victor. Me on the way to tell you. And then I thought about the fact that Victor had a key to the house. That he came over that week. That he knew the car I drove. The silence in the room had a weight to it. I cannot prove it, she said. I want you to understand that. I cannot prove he tampered with the car. I have no evidence of that. What I have are the financial documents, which I still have, copies I kept with me. And I have the knowledge of what I was carrying when the car went off and who stood to benefit most from me not being able to tell you." She looked at him directly. "Daniel, I was afraid. I was pregnant and alone, and I had a broken collarbone, and the man I suspected of trying to kill me was your brother, the person who helped you organize my funeral, who sat in the front row at my memorial and cried, who has been at your side every week for 4 years. She let that settle. I didn't know how to come back. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know if anyone would believe me over Victor. He's charming. He's been with you your whole life. I was the wife of 4 years. Who would they choose?" Daniel stood up from the chair. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her, looking out at the quiet village yard, the goats, the afternoon light on the dust. He thought about Victor at the funeral, Victor's hand on his shoulder at the graveside, Victor calling every week for the first year, making sure Daniel was eating, making sure Daniel wasn't alone. Victor who had wept, Victor who had helped him choose the headstone, Victor who had suggested the design for the hospital wing Daniel had donated in Miriam's name, who had attended the opening ceremony, who had spoken about Miriam with what had appeared to be genuine grief. He thought about the Kumasi land. He had asked Victor about it twice in the past 2 years. Victor had told him both times that the transfer had been delayed due to a legal issue with the title deed and that it was being handled. Daniel had believed him because Daniel had been grieving and not paying attention, and because Victor was his brother and he had never had reason not to believe him. He thought about the coastal property near Takoradi, the one their father had always said he was saving. Victor had told him 18 months ago that the property had been sold before their father died, that their father had made that decision in the final months while Victor was managing his affairs. Daniel had been sad about it, but had accepted it. He turned back around. Miriam was watching him. Noah was watching him too, paper folding abandoned now, reading the room the way perceptive children do without knowing they are doing it. "I need to see the documents," Daniel said. She went to the shelf, moved 2 books, and came back with a small wrapped package. She unwrapped it on the table. Papers, photocopies, some faded, some clear, covered in figures and signatures and account numbers. She had been living in this village for 4 years, with these documents wrapped in paper on a shelf between 2 books, waiting. Daniel sat back down and went through every page. He took his time. He was an architect by training, a man who read technical documents for a living, and he moved through these with the same careful attention. The transfers were there. The account routing was there. The signatures, his father's, shaky in the later documents in a way that Daniel recognized immediately as the tremor his father had developed in the last 18 months of his life, were on documents that no careful son would have brought to a sick old man without explaining exactly what he was signing. His father's signature on a land transfer document dated 3 weeks before his father had died. His father, who by that point had barely been able to hold a pen, who Victor had been visiting alone 3 times a week while Daniel was managing projects in other cities and trusting his brother to take care of things. Daniel set the last page down. "We are going to fix this," he said. She looked at him. She had the expression of a woman who has wanted to believe something for a long time and has also had a long time to understand why wanting to believe something and believing it are not the same thing. "How?" she said. "I need to go back," he said. "I need to do this carefully, and I need to do it fast before he finds out I've been here." He looked at her. "But first," he glanced at Noah. "First, I need you to tell me his name." She was quiet for a moment. "You already know," she said. "I want to hear you say it." Her expression shifted. Something that had been held very carefully for a long time moved in her face. "His name is Noah," she said. "Noah Daniel Ose." He had given the boy his name. Even in hiding, even alone, she had given the boy his name. Daniel pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed. If you have been watching from the beginning, you already know this story is about to move somewhere that nobody in it was prepared for. Before we go further, our Facebook page has the next story already waiting for you. The link is pinned in the first comment below this video. Go and follow us there, then come back. Because what Daniel does next is the part that changes everything. He left the village 2 hours later. Not because he wanted to leave. Because staying longer meant Victor had more time to move if he somehow found out. The calculation was cold and he hated making it, but he made it because the only way to protect Miriam and Noah was to go back and finish this before Victor could do anything to stop it. Noah had stood at the edge of the yard when Daniel left. He did not ask Daniel to stay or make any scene about it. He simply stood there with his paper shape in one hand, watching. "Is he going to come back?" he asked his mother, not looking at Miriam, still watching Daniel walk down the path. Miriam was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Okay," said Noah, and went back inside. Daniel drove back to Accra with 4 years of grief, rearranging itself into something that had no clean name. Not anger exactly. Not joy. Something that required both, and held neither, the specific internal weather of a man who has been wrong about the most important things in his life and is only now beginning to understand how wrong. He called no one. Not Grace, not Kweku, not his lawyer. He drove and thought, and by the time Accra's lights appeared in the distance, he had the outline of what he needed to do. It took 11 days. He did not contact Victor during those 11 days. He answered Victor's calls normally, kept his voice at its usual register, rescheduled dinner with a work excuse that Victor accepted without question. He had been rescheduling Victor for 4 years without Victor pushing back, and now he understood why. A grieving brother was not paying attention. A grieving brother was useful cover. On the first day, he called his lawyer, James Appia, and explained enough for James to understand the shape of what was needed. James had worked with Daniel for 7 years and had the specific gift of good lawyers everywhere, which was to absorb serious information without reacting to it until he had thought about it fully. He listened. Then he said, "I'm going to need a forensic accountant I trust completely. Not connected to any of your company accounts. Somebody clean. Give me 2 days." The forensic accountant arrived on the 3rd day, a quiet woman named Abina Frimpong, who came to Daniel's private home rather than his office, and spent 6 hours on the first evening going through every document Miriam had photographed and additional records Daniel had pulled from the company's archived files, the ones kept in storage at the old Osei construction office that Victor had never thought to clean out because Victor had never imagined Daniel would go looking. Abina Frimpong found the transfers within 2 hours. By the end of the 6 hours, she had found considerably more. The land transfers under power of attorney, an additional stream of payments connected to a second shell company that hadn't appeared in Miriam's documents, a set of inflated supplier invoices that had been running for nearly 8 years, 2 years longer than Miriam had been able to trace. The full picture was larger than Miriam had known. The total exposure, by Abina's preliminary calculation, was closer to $900,000. Daniel sat with that number for a while. Victor had sat in the front row at Miriam's memorial and cried in front of a congregation of 300 people, and then driven home past 2 pieces of land he had stolen from his dying father, and come back the following week and taken his grieving brother to dinner and ordered the expensive wine and talked about how much he missed Miriam and how Daniel needed to keep going and stay strong. He had done this for 4 years. On the 7th day, James Appia informed Daniel that the Police Economic Crimes Unit had been briefed through the appropriate channels and were preparing. On the 8th day, an independent investigator located the mechanic who had serviced Miriam's car 4 years ago. The man had since moved from Accra to Kumasi. He agreed to meet Daniel privately. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. At the end of it, the mechanic said nothing directly confirming or denying anything about the car's brakes. But he said 2 things that Daniel noted carefully. First, that he had been visited 2 days after Miriam's death by a man he described in detail, a description that matched Victor exactly, who had asked questions about whether the mechanic had noticed anything unusual during the service. Second, that he had received a payment of 3,000 cedis shortly after that visit from an account he could not now trace, with a note that said, "Thank you for your service," which made no sense to him because he had already been paid for the work in cash at the time. It was not a confession. It was not enough to bring criminal charges on the tampering, but it was enough, added to everything else, to understand the shape of what Victor had been and what Victor had done. On the 11th day, Daniel called an emergency shareholders meeting of Osei Construction. Victor arrived late, which he always did, a small performance of casual confidence that he had been giving for years. He walked in and saw the room and stopped. James Appia was there. Abina Frimpong was there with a folder in front of her. 2 police officers in plain clothes were standing near the back wall. The other board members, 3 of them, the men who had worked with Daniel's father for decades and who had been watching the company's accounts with confusion for years, wondering about the discrepancies Victor had explained away each time, were sitting in a row across the table with expressions ranging from careful to grave. Victor looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back at him. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Victor tried 3 different versions of denial, each one smaller than the last, retreating from the one before it as the documents were placed in front of him one by one. He tried the version where the transfers were authorized. The documents showing they were not authorized were produced. He tried the version where his father had understood what he was signing. Abena Frimpong's analysis of the signature tremor and the dates relative to medical records were produced. He tried the version where Daniel had always known and had agreed. James Appia asked him to produce any written record of this agreement. No record existed. By the second hour, Victor had stopped talking. The police officers from the back of the room walked forward. It was not dramatic. There was no shouting. Victor stood up when they reached him and went with them without resistance, the way people go when they have been waiting for a long time for something and are finally too tired to pretend otherwise. The board members stayed in the room after Victor left. The oldest of them, a man named Mr. Asante, who had worked with Daniel's father since before Daniel was born, sat quietly for a moment and then said, "Your father always knew Victor was not careful, but he hoped. He thought the responsibility would change him." He paused. "I am sorry, Daniel. We should have looked harder." Daniel nodded. He did not trust his voice fully at that moment. He went home and sat alone in his house, the one he and Miriam had bought together in the first year of their marriage, the one he had never left because leaving it felt like admitting she was really gone. And he sat in the living room in the dark and let himself feel everything he had been holding tightly for 11 days. His father's hands shaking on documents he did not understand, Victor guiding the pen. Victor who had cried at the grave, Victor who had helped carry the casket, Victor who had said to Daniel, many times in many forms, that Miriam would have wanted him to keep going, to stay strong, to move forward. Victor who knew Miriam was not in the casket. He stayed in the house for one full day. Then he got up, called Grace, told her he was taking personal time and to reschedule everything. He packed a bag. He drove north. He reached the village in the early afternoon. The same route. The same place where the tarmac ended, the same walk through the grass. He came into the village from the same direction as the first time, and the first person he saw was Noah, who was sitting in the middle of the yard drawing something in the dirt with a stick, deeply focused. The boy looked up when Daniel's shadow reached him. He studied Daniel for a moment. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would." Noah considered this. "Yes," he said, as if filing it away as confirmed data. He looked back at his drawing. "I'm making a map." "Of what?" "This village." He pointed with the stick. "That's the community tab. That's Mr. Kwami's shop." He pointed at a rough square. "That's our house." Daniel crouched down to see it better. It was good. The proportions were not perfect, but the layout was recognizable, the relative positions of the buildings correct. "Did someone teach you how to draw maps?" "No." Noah looked at the drawing critically. "But things should be in the right place, or the map doesn't work." Daniel looked at his son. He had nothing to say to that. It was exactly right. Miriam appeared in the doorway. She had seen him from inside and come to the door and stood there, arms at her sides, not folded this time, watching him with Noah. Something in her face that she was not fully hiding, something that had been locked for a very long time and had not yet decided whether to open. He stood up. "Is it done?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Victor was arrested 4 days ago. James has the documents filed. The land transfers are being reversed through the court. It will take time, but it will be reversed." He paused. "He cannot reach you. He cannot reach Noah. That part is finished." She nodded slowly. She pressed her lips together. He stepped forward. "I owe you more than I know how to say," he said, "for what you carried, for what you protected. I know you had to choose between coming back to me and protecting him." He looked at Noah, who had returned to his map drawing and was adding something to the far corner with great concentration. "I understand why you chose the way you did." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I didn't only choose for him." She said it quietly. "I chose for you too. If I had come back with no evidence and only my word against Victor's, what would have happened to you? You would have been in the middle of it, choosing between your wife and your brother with no proof either way." She shook her head. "I could not do that to you. I needed to wait until it was something that could be proven." She looked down. "I just did not know it would take 4 years." Daniel stepped forward and she did not step back. He put his hands on her arms, both of them, gently, the way you hold something you have been without for a very long time and are still not fully sure is real. She let him. Noah looked up from the map. He watched both of them for a moment. Then he said, without ceremony, to Daniel, "Are you my father?" The yard went completely still. Daniel looked at his son. This boy with his jaw and his eyes and his particular focused energy, sitting cross-legged in the dirt with a stick in his hand and a map of his whole world drawn around him. "Yes," Daniel said, "I am." Noah thought about this. He tilted his head the way he did. "Why didn't you come before?" Daniel crouched down. "Because I didn't know where you were," he said. "I was looking. I just didn't know where to look." Noah absorbed this. His expression was serious and fair, the way children's expressions are when they are genuinely weighing something. "Okay," he said finally. He held up the drawing stick. "Do you know how to make maps?" "I'm an architect," Daniel said. "I make plans of buildings." Noah's eyes widened slightly, genuine interest. "Buildings are like maps," he said. "But the other way?" Daniel looked at his son. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly right." Before we reach the end of this story, go and check the pinned comment under this video right now. Our Facebook page link is there. Follow us, and you will always know when the next story drops. Every story we bring carries something real. Come with us for the next one. He did not leave the village that evening. Miriam did not ask him to. She made food, and they ate at the small table, all three of them, and it was strange and careful and nothing like easy, but it was real, which was more than Daniel had had at any table for 4 years. Noah ate fast and talked in the way that children talk when they are comfortable, freely, and about many things, moving from one subject to the next with a logic that was internal and followed no particular path that adults could trace. He told Daniel about Mr. Kwami's shop and how it smelled like condensed milk and kerosene. He told Daniel about the tree at the end of the village path that had a branch perfect for sitting. He told Daniel about a goat that had escaped twice in 1 week and the second time ended up inside someone's kitchen. Daniel listened to all of it. He listened the way a man listens when he is trying to learn everything about a person that he missed the first years of, when he is taking each small detail and placing it carefully somewhere inside himself, making up for lost time in the only way available to him now, which was to pay attention to every single thing. After Noah was asleep, Daniel and Miriam sat outside on the low bench against the house wall in the evening quiet. The village had settled into its night sounds. Somewhere a radio was playing something faint and indistinct. The sky out here, away from city light, was wide and full of stars in a way that Daniel had forgotten was possible. "I have been thinking about what happens now," Miriam said. "So have I. I cannot go back to Accra the same way." She said it carefully, not as a condition, as a truth. "Too much has happened, and I am not the same person, and neither are you." She looked at the sky. "I don't know what we are to each other now. I only know what we were." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want?" he said. "Not what you think is possible. What do you actually want?" She thought about it honestly. "I want Noah to have his father," she said. "I want him to know where he comes from. I want him to have access to everything that should have been his from the beginning." She paused. "And I want to be able to trust again. I want to get back to the place where I trust you. I'm not there yet. I need you to know that. 4 years is a long time, and what I carried in those 4 years changed me, and I can't pretend it didn't." He nodded. "I'm not asking you to pretend anything." He looked at her. "I'm asking for time. Whatever amount you need. I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him sideways. "You say that now. I know." He looked at his hands, the hands that had pressed white lilies against a headstone every year for 4 years. He had been going to the grave of an empty casket. He had been talking to a stone while she was here, 2 hours away, raising their son and keeping his documents on a shelf and living with the weight of everything alone. "I know words are not enough," he said, "but I don't have anything else to offer right now except the fact that I will be here. Tomorrow and the day after that, until you can see it clearly enough to believe it." She said nothing for a while. The stars moved the way stars move when you actually look at them, slowly, as if they are going somewhere that is not in a hurry to be reached. "Noah has your laugh," she said finally. "He does it when something genuinely surprises him. This short, sudden sound like he can't help it." She smiled, a small one, to the stars. "I've been watching it for 4 years. It's been like having a piece of you I didn't ask for, but couldn't send back." Daniel looked at her. He didn't say anything. There was nothing that needed to be said. The weeks that followed were not a movie ending. They were not a clean resolution where everything that had been broken was suddenly whole. They were something more honest than that, and in their honesty, more valuable. Daniel came back every week. He drove the route he now knew in any weather, and in any light, and in any state of mind, and he walked through the grass and came into the village and found Noah doing whatever Noah was doing, which changed weekly, but always involved either building something, drawing something, or explaining something to a goat with the patience of a person who believes that communication is possible if you try hard enough. He brought nothing expensive. He had learned from the first visit that Noah did not need expensive things. He brought things that were useful or interesting or both. A better set of drawing pencils. A book about how buildings were designed that Noah went through 3 times in the first week with the focused attention of someone extracting everything useful from a source. A compass, which Noah immediately used to draw a perfect circle in the dirt, and then looked at Daniel and said, "Now the map will be accurate." He and Miriam talked, slowly, carefully, the way you approach something that was damaged, feeling for the solid parts, testing the weight before trusting it fully. Some evenings were easy, some were not. There were conversations that required them to sit with difficult things and not reach for resolution too quickly, to allow the difficult thing to be difficult and not try to fix it into something more comfortable. He also began, in those weeks, to dismantle the parts of his life in Accra that had been built around absence. The habit of not eating properly, the habit of working until late because the alternative was an empty house, the habit of keeping Miriam's grave as the primary place where he put his feelings, a clean and manageable grief that had kept him from having to feel anything too complicated. He told Kweku everything. Kweku had been sitting with the weight of having made that call for weeks, uncertain whether he had done the right thing. Daniel drove to the clinic and sat with him for 2 hours and said, "You gave me back everything." Kweku had been quiet for a while and then said, "I almost didn't call. I almost convinced myself I was wrong." Daniel had looked at him. "I'm grateful you weren't the kind of man who convinced yourself." The headstone was not removed. It stood on the hillside as it always had, the crack along the bottom left corner still unrepaired. He stopped bringing white lilies. He stopped going every year on the anniversary. But he did not remove the stone because it had stood for 4 years for something real, and he did not think it was right to erase that. What he did instead, on the anniversary that came 6 months after he had found Miriam alive, was bring Noah to the cemetery. He had asked Miriam if this was right, and she had said it was his decision, and he had decided yes. He had brought Noah and stood with him in front of the stone and told him as simply and as honestly as a person tells things to a 4-year-old that this stone had stood here for a long time while the people who loved him had not been able to find each other, that it was a marker of something difficult that was now over, that from here things were different. Noah had stood in front of the headstone and looked at his mother's name carved in the stone. He had traced the letters with his finger, slowly, the way he touched everything he was trying to understand. "It has Mama's name," he said. "Yes, but Mama is not here." "No, Mama is in the village. This is just a marker, a way of saying that someone was missed." Noah thought about this for a long moment. Then he said, "We should plant a tree." He looked around. "Something that grows, so that the missing is there, but something else is there too." They planted a tree, a small neem bought from a nursery near the cemetery entrance. It would take years to grow properly. Daniel knew that. Noah seemed to know it too, and he seemed to find this not discouraging, but simply correct, that the right things take the time they need. Victor's case moved through the courts. The land transfers were reversed over the following months. The coastal property near Takoradi and the Kumasi land returned to the Osei construction portfolio. The stolen funds were partially recovered. Daniel gave his testimony when required and then let James Appia handle the rest. He had other things to attend to. By the end of the first year, Noah had been registered in his full legal name and had been enrolled in the small school in the nearby town, which he attended 3 days a week and about which he had opinions that he expressed clearly and without much editing. He liked mathematics, and he tolerated language arts, and he had strong views about his teacher's approach to geography that he had communicated directly to the teacher, which had resulted in a meeting between the teacher, Miriam, and Noah that Miriam had described to Daniel afterward with the expression of a woman trying not to laugh. "He's you," she had said, "in a smaller body with better instincts." Daniel was not sure he deserved that description, but he had been quietly pleased by it. By the middle of the second year, Miriam and Daniel had found their way to something that was not the same as what they had been before, because the same was not possible, and neither of them wanted to pretend otherwise. It was something that had been built with full knowledge of everything that had broken, which made it different in quality, more careful in some ways, more honest in others. She laughed again. Not the small, controlled laugh of someone being polite, but the real one, the one that took over her face and came out louder than she planned. It came back slowly, in pieces, at first only when Noah did something that surprised her, then in other moments, in evenings on the bench, in conversations with Daniel that arrived somewhere unexpectedly good. The first time it happened fully, both of them sitting outside, and something Daniel said landing wrong, and then differently, and then exactly right, in some way that released it completely. That laugh, she had pressed her hand over her mouth immediately the way she always had, trying to call it back. And Daniel had looked at her the way he had looked at her in the market with the pineapple, grateful, simply and entirely grateful, and she had seen his expression, and the laugh had come back even louder, and she had given up trying to stop it. There is no single ending to this story because lives do not have single endings. They have continuing mornings. Daniel's mornings now begin before full light because Noah rises early and considers everyone else's sleeping in to be a scheduling problem that requires correction. The house is bigger than the first one. They moved to the larger village 2 months ago, a place with a proper school and a clinic and a road that connects to the main highway. Daniel keeps a small office there, nothing like the Accra Towers, a room with good light and a drafting table and a connection good enough for the video calls that keep Osei Construction operating without requiring him to be in the city more than twice a month. Noah attends school 5 days a week and has made 2 friends he describes as acceptable and 1 friend he describes as interesting, which from Noah is the higher compliment. He has started learning to draw building plans. He corrects Daniel's measurements on occasion and is, with frequency that is becoming difficult to argue with, correct. Miriam teaches 3 days a week at the school. She has a law degree she has never formally practiced. She has begun to think about what practicing it from here might look like, which cases matter in this kind of community, which structures need the attention of someone who knows how they work. She thinks slowly and she thinks well, and when she decides something, she is not in the habit of deciding it part way. Daniel visits the cemetery once a year still. Not on the anniversary, on a day that feels right, which is not always the same day. He stands in front of the headstone and does not talk to the stone anymore because he no longer needs to. The neem tree is growing. It will be taller than the headstone in another year or 2. One afternoon last month, Noah was in the yard working on something that involved wire and 2 pieces of wood and a calculation he was doing on paper. Daniel came out and sat nearby and watched for a while. "What are you making?" Daniel asked. "A bridge," Noah said. "A small model. I want to see if the proportions hold." "What kind of bridge?" "The kind that stays up," Noah said, as if this were the only relevant specification. Daniel watched his son work. The afternoon light was where it goes in the late hours, long and warm, and not in any hurry to leave. The village went about its sounds around them. Somewhere a radio, somewhere a goat, somewhere a child's voice, and then another answering. He had spent 4 years putting white lilies on an empty grave. He was sitting in the sun watching his son build a bridge. The truest things in a life are rarely the things that arrive with announcements. They arrive the way Kweku's phone call arrived, through an ordinary day, on a number you almost didn't call back. They arrive the way Noah arrived in a village doorway in a red shirt with no shoes and enormous eyes. They arrive the way Miriam arrived at a door she had been afraid to open, letting him in not because she was ready but because keeping the difficult thing outside was no longer worth what it was costing. Some things that are lost are not gone. Some things that are gone are not lost. And some people will hold what matters at the cost of everything else, not because they have no fear, but because the fear is simply not bigger than the love. If this story stayed with you, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Every comment reminds us that these stories reach real people and that matters more than you know. Like this video, subscribe to Royal Secrets, and we will see you in the next story.